Great, thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers for inviting this abstract, which I'm happy to present on behalf of my co-authors who are listed here. This was a study that we did at the journal Critical Care Medicine, which is an official journal of the Society of Critical Care Medicine. And just by way of disclosures, I was an associate editor at that journal at that time, currently a senior editor there. Tim Buckman was the editor-in-chief of the journal at that time. Sophie Tosta was and is the managing editor at that journal, and the other authors are from our departments of economics, actually. So have no disclosures. So it's nice to give this talk here where this concept doesn't need as much motivation as it might elsewhere. Obviously, the concept of paying for peer review has been a long-standing question in the field. To the best of my knowledge, there is one study that has looked at this before in economics, but I admit that that is probably incomplete knowledge, and there may be some others looking at it. And so our motivation was to try to add some empirical evidence to this debate and to this question, specifically through the lens of the COVID pandemic, because we found looking after patients in critical care units during the pandemic, in the face of kind of an evidence vacuum, there was really need to expedite peer review to get some evidence to the bedside for people to use in looking after these critically ill patients. And so we sort of wondered if this is a bottleneck in that process, is there a way to expedite that process? And so we were looking to bring some empirical evidence specifically in biomedicine and specifically with pandemic readiness in mind. So our study was actually, the primary results were actually published in the journal Critical Care Medicine a couple of months ago, and I'll just kind of review it a little bit here. I don't know if Dr. McLeod is still listening, but we did actually pre-register this with the Open Science Forum, so it was registered, and we called it quasi randomized for the reasons that you'll see here. We ran the trial during mostly the North American fall and winter, I guess, in spring, from September 2023 to March 2024, a period of a little over 6 months. And we divided that period into these consecutive 2-week epochs that we sort of labeled as A weeks or B weeks, which were the two different conditions in the experiment, where the initial A versus B was chosen at random, and it was set in motion by the managing editor, and the handling editors were blinded to what condition that was the initial condition. So during the A weeks, we sent out invitations to reviewers under the usual cover where it just said, we would like you to accept this offer to review. Please return your review within 14 days if you do accept. And then in the alternating blocks, it was essentially the same letter, but with this very important adjustment where we said, we appreciate your time. We know that you're busy people. And as a token of our appreciation, if you do complete this review, we are pleased to offer you an honorarium of $250 US. So the initial condition was set at random, and then we just kind of went from there, and the managing editor just kind of substituted the automatic letter within editorial manager. So it all kind of happened behind the scenes, and the handling editors didn't get involved in any of the switching of letters or anything, and were in fact ostensibly blinded to the conditions at any given time. So during that 6-month period, the journal received 776 manuscripts, 131 of which were sent out for review. So that generated 715 invitations to 595 distinct reviewers. So there were people who were invited more than one time during the 6-month period. Just by luck of the draw and the way things went over the course of that time, there were more invitations sent out under the incentive condition than under the control condition. And I should mention here that those were all pooled together. So all of the A weeks were pooled, all of the B weeks were pooled. And I should also hasten to mention that we extracted we eliminated the data from around the holidays. So everyone who got invited during the holidays got the control invitation, but we didn't count any of that data in the analysis for confounding reasons. And then our primary outcome was echoing Emily's talk a little bit, this concept of rate of conversion, where we wanted to know what percentage of the invitations converted into a review that came back into the office. So if we sent out 100 invitations, we got 50 reviews back from that, that would be a rate of conversion of 50%. So the results were basically that there was no real difference in how frequently people accepted these invitations, whether they were incentivized or not. But we did see a small, we saw a statistically significant difference. The magnitude is maybe something to discuss, where incentivized reviews actually had a higher rate of conversion than non-incentivized reviews by 8 percentage points, and a slightly quicker time to submission by 1 day. And then importantly, we also wanted to adjudicate the review quality. And so we had the handling editors, as per usual, look at what they perceive to be the quality of the reviews using a 100-point Likert scale, and saw no difference there, with the caveat that only about 2/3 of those reviews actually got a score from the handling editor. So because we're a clinical journal and we have a clinical readership, we thought, we'd also like to present this as you might a clinical trial and sort of a survival analysis. So this is what that looks like. This is a Kaplan-Meier curve and a Cox proportional hazards model of the same data, because it's kind of a time to event sort of phenomenon. And in this analogy, we sort of said that an invitation went out and survived until it resulted in a returned review report, at which point it had that invitation had then died. And you can see here that there's a separation in these curves. They're not vastly different, but even with the confidence intervals there, you see that there is a difference where incentivized reviews generated reports that came in a little bit quicker and a little bit more often than the non-incentivized ones. So what about the manuscripts? And then, and this also gets to the important point that Emily raised in her comments, that we're very interested in getting reviewers to accept an invitation, but at the end of the day, editors, journals were all mostly interested in getting manuscripts decided, getting a full paper processed, regardless of the activities of any one particular reviewer. So of those 131 manuscripts that went out during that time, the median time to a final decision was 98 days, and it varied a little bit. And so we're interested to see, is there an impact here on the decision time for a manuscript? And based on the nature of the experiment, because we had these switchover points every 2 weeks, not every manuscript will have been included reviews that were sent out all with the same condition, if that makes sense. So only about 58% of the total were all of the invitations for that manuscript sent out within the same non-overlapping 2-week block, where they were all controlled invitations or all incentivized invitations. So we have a significant decrement in sample size and statistical power here, but it enables us to kind of take a little look at what happened. And we actually see that the incentivized manuscripts actually had a longer turnaround time, which is something that's, we're still scratching our heads a little bit on this. And I think attributing it mostly to that loss of statistical power and some outlier effects. So the other way to look at it is to actually visualize these the time frames for each of these manuscripts from start to finish. So what you see here is a representation where each bar is one of the manuscripts in the study, and the x-axis here is kind of meaningless. They're just arranged by the amount of time that it took for the total editorial process, which is to say submission to final decision. And then on the y-axis there, you see that how long it took in days for each of those manuscripts. The yellow portions at the bottom is the number of days it took for the longest of those first reviews to come back. And then the teal color versus the gray color there is whether the paper was accepted, rejected, or transferred to one of our sister publications. And you can see that certainly as you get to those longer total editorial times, which is mostly the papers that went on to get accepted, that time spent in that first R0 first initial review phase is kind of a small contribution. So that process has a much larger impact on the shorter turnaround ones, which tend to be more rejections, than on the longer turnaround ones. So in summary, we did what I would call a quasi-randomized pragmatic experiment on peer review at a medical journal on incentives, where we found that a $250 cash incentive resulted in an 8 percentage point increase in the rate of return reports, and that they came back about a day earlier with no obvious difference in review quality. But that in total, that effect may be somewhat overshadowed by the total editorial time taken for these papers to get processed, especially the ones that went on to get accepted that would have had additional rounds of review and additional time in the hands of the authors. This is an important slide because it's necessary and important for me to acknowledge. certainly the journal and the society, and in particular the editor-in-chief at the time, Tim Buckman, who had the vision and the foresight and the fortitude, frankly, to let us tinker with his journal while it was in full operation, and to the New Frontiers and Research Fund, which is a federal funding program from the government of Canada that actually furnished the payments that went out to these reviewers, and again also had that sort of appreciation of the importance of adding empirical evidence to this important question and debate. Thank you very much.
So should we pay reviewers?
Should I answer that right now, or should I wait to see?
Yes, you should wait. You should answer it while people are coming to the mic.
It's a very good question. Some of those later slides where I began to, occur to me that paying a reviewer to do just the initial review is perhaps not the best strategy. So importantly, and I think this will come up, we didn't condition the payment on an on-time review. We didn't contract the person to basically do the complete, front to back review if it went on for additional rounds. So without having done that, it's hard to say if that payment is worthwhile. And it's probably relative, and it probably changes from one field to the next. So my way of wheel spinning to try to not answer to see what other people have to say.
Fantastic, John.
John Ioannidis from Stanford. Really great study, and the kind of study that we need. I'm wondering how sharp was your instrument for appraising quality, because really this is the outcome that matters the most. Was it ascertained in a blinded fashion? Do you have some sense about how responsive it would be to major changes in quality? I mean, what features were assessed to tell that something is good quality? And a second, more minor question, was that US dollars or Canadian dollars?
Ouch. It was US dollars, the good old greenback, so it was worth a bit more than the Canadian. And the majority of our reviewers, I think, were US based. The question about the review qualities is an excellent one, especially having seen some of the discussions earlier in the day and yesterday about the tools that we have for this. So this was we did our best to standardize the process, and we had a run-in phase where we revised our rubric, and we did some training with the handling editors, and did a roll-in period where we got them to review as much as possible. We realized that not the whole range of our scores were being used. It's everyone kind of gets a 75. So I don't have the greatest confidence in the responsiveness of that metric. But I think it probably would have signaled something if there was something that was really out of whack from the results. So an imperfect measure, but hopefully good enough to see a big signal.
Great. In the back?
From American Society for Cell Biology. Thank you for sharing the data on paid peer review. Do you also look at the editorial decision? So does paid reviewer corresponding higher acceptance rate or higher rejection rate?
Excellent question. And that also harkens to this kind of concept of what happens to the manuscript. So when we look at the manuscript level, and again, we are looking at 58% of the manuscripts rather than 100%, there's a small difference. I think it was an acceptance rate of about 44% in one arm and 48 or 49% in the other arm. And the fact that I can't remember which is which, I think reveals that I don't find those to be overly different from one another in a sample size of that magnitude.
Great. In the back here?
Kirsten Patrick from the CMAJ. I was just curious, were you ever, speaking to quality, in the galling position of having to pay $250 for an absolutely terrible review?
I don't know. So I would have seen a number of these reviews as a handling editor at the time, and I didn't see any appreciable change in the quality of stuff coming back. I don't, and I'd like to think that my fellow associate editors would have said something to me if they hadn't. I didn't get any signal to that effect. But again, you're totally correct to point out that there was no conditioning here. We didn't require a certain high or low word count, depending on what you think is a good quality review. And so it was just whatever came through.
Fantastic here.
Harsha from Carnegie Mellon University. So since this $250 offer was a significant departure from the previous policy, I could imagine a world where the following happens, that someone gets this $250 offer and they'll put on Twitter that, hey, our favorite journal is offering $250 for reviewing. And then I'd see it and I'd say, hey, yesterday I accepted to do this review and they didn't give me anything. And so people might see it on social media and change their behavior, or I might even write you a hate mail that, why didn't you give me the money? So didn't you get any hate mail or even discussions on social media?
This is, well, I didn't follow anything myself on that front, and I didn't get any signals from our social media editor that there was anything going on, but this is an excellent point, and I think it's kind of the crux of a lot of the matter here. First, there's a bit of a natural experiment there because there would have been a certain number of reviewers who got invited twice. And some of those would have had the incentive first and then the not incentive the second time. So we did a sensitivity analysis there and we didn't see too much of a difference, although the p-value kind of drifted a little bit north of the 0.05 mark when you look at just the first invitations. But it speaks, I think, to the whole concept here, and this is why we partnered with economists to do this study, which is that this is really about incentivizing behavior. And we see all kinds of downstream consequences of the incentive structure in our systems and the current incentive in the current ecosystem. Authoring publications is what's incentivized. That's generated a lot of behaviors. If you add a second layer of incentives where now there's an incentive to review, a monetary incentive to review, it remains an open question what sequence of behaviors would arise to game that system as well. And that speaks a little bit to your first question. Is I scratch my head more and more about what it would mean to add another incentive structure in this already complex ecosystem of incentives by doing something like this.
Right, here in the front.
Tim Feeney, BMJ. When I first started getting review requests, I would read the emails excitedly. I would read the whole thing because it was like, oh, somebody wants to know what I think. Now when I get review requests, I skip to the abstract and I just go about my business like either this is in my expertise or not. And so my question is, how do you know that people read that they were going to get paid? Did anyone come back to you and say, oh, you're going to pay me? Indicating that they never even saw that. That's like my biggest worry, is that nobody even knew they were going to get paid, so that wouldn't change their behavior.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we spent some time wondering if editorial manager could put things in, bold or red or whatever. And I think we made some efforts to make it look different. And I think we actually come to think of it, changed the header of the control letter as well to say, warning, we're experimenting here. So this letter might look different than the one you're normally used to, but you're absolutely correct. We have no way of knowing if everyone saw that, other than I know for sure that based on some of the emails that I got about feedback on this program, that at least a handful of them did, because some people did write to the journal and say, why are you offering this?
Right, here in the back.
Online question from Jose Marino, affiliation to be determined. Were editors aware of the group into which reviewers were assigned, and any practical issues with paying internationally?
So ostensibly, no. The handling editors were blinded to this because they were not involved in the coin toss that set off the first one, and then everything happened kind of behind the scenes where they would just pick someone and then an email would go out. There probably ways for an enterprising editor to work around that if they were really determined. And I think that there were not too many hurdles. There were almost more hurdles to paying US-based reviewers because there were some tax implications, I think. So we had to structure it in a certain way that eliminated some of those concerns. And I think for the international folks, that kind of paved the way as well.
Great, in the back.
Tyler from Sipinion. Related to the question earlier, did you guys change the subject line at all with regard to ensuring that the incentive was properly communicated? It's common practice to delete an email if you're not interested without reading it.
I don't believe we did. That would be something for the time machine.
Fair enough.
Thank you. That's a good suggestion.
Great, here in the front.
Yeah, Mark Helfand, Sherwood, Oregon. The first thing I thought about when I saw the amount of money was, did you do a dose finding study first? And even after the fact, it's sort of not, it's money, it's monetary incentives. So it isn't really clear. You may have different results. If you have better results with a lower amount, you might have your best results if you told people 50% chance of no money and 50% chance of 500. So I'm just saying, if you thought about like trying it again with a different dose.
Absolutely. And we, our initial plan was to do a dose response, if you will. We were going to do a $100 arm and a $400 arm. And as generous as the Canadian government was, they couldn't quite, there were trade-offs with sample size, basically. I mean, we could have done that, but then the groups would have been smaller. We'd lose statistical power. So that remains to be seen if different monetary values matter and if different values matter in different journals in different fields, and then if non-monetary incentives, waiving fees at the society or offsetting publication charges, those sorts of things would have a different effect.
Very good. Here in the back.
David, Annette Flanagan, Jam and the Jam Network. Great study, fantastic presentation. Maybe I missed it. How many people cashed the check?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. And I never even thought to ask. I can imagine that the answer is not 100%, based on, well, I know for a fact that the answer isn't 100%, because a check got sent to me, and I felt that as the author of the study, that couldn't be cashed. But I think there are others as well, based on some of the emails that I got. But I'm going to try to get an answer to that question.
There's how many, claimed the monetary award.
Yeah,
and related, I think you alluded to this difficulty in paying in the US. So did you have to actually get tax forms to pay these people?
Didn't. And I think it was something in the wording of it being an honorarium or something. We toyed with a lot of things. We were going to do Amazon gift cards, and then we thought nobody really wants those anyway. And this eventually the society, and I have to admit, most of these details were left to the Society of Critical Care Medicine, but they figured out a way to send paper checks to the address that was in editorial manager.
Thank you.
Very good. And here, the last question.
Right. Hi, my name's Chris Leonard from Cactus Communications. I've got two fairly straightforward questions. First one is, how did you arrive at that particular sum as a reward for the reviewers? And then my second question, maybe slightly more complicated. $250 is a nice amount if you're living in California or Canada. If you're living in Central America, Africa, somewhere like that, that's a significant amount of money. Were the reviewers largely from the West or from the rest of the world?
So taking the second one first, the reviewers were largely mostly North American, and with some European and Australia, New Zealand. That would be our usual pool of reviewers. And the 250 amount came from some math that involved correlating the sample size calculation with the funding amount. To be very pragmatic about it, we took the precedent is a study by Chetty et al., which was done in an economics journal back in 2014, and they offered $100. And we figured that enough time had passed that we'd had to at least double that, and then pick a number that would be sufficiently high that people wouldn't say at the end, if it was a neutral trial, that number just wasn't high enough. But you're right, it was a little bit arbitrary. And then in sorting out whether it was that $1 value versus 100 and a 400, that was just making the math work with the sample sizes and the funding available.